Welcome again to today's class on Introduction to JavaScript, a continuation of what we did last Monday. So to recap what we did last Monday, I think we went through some. I think my colleague Amos concluded on some JavaScript outputs, how you can output some information from the JavaScript console or from your code base. So I think we did talk about, initially we started with the inner.html, where you can use statements like document.get element by ID, and then we can use that to get the element you are trying to target, and then from that we can put in things we want into this element. So if you are targeting an element with an ID demo, we can apply the .inner HTML to it and then assign anything you want to assign to this particular element, and then it can show on the screen because the element will be in the HTML to show on the page. So we can use this to output elements on the page, even though this is an old way of outputting stuff on your page. And then we can also took a look at console.log, where we can use console.log on our console or in the JavaScript script tags to print out things to the console. So let's say if you want to print hello world to the console, we can open our script tag either in the head section of our HTML file, or we can even open a script tag in the body section. So there are two ways of opening a script tag on your page in an HTML file. It's either you open it in the head section or you can open it in the body section. But then it's always advisable for you to use the body section because you don't want to slow down the loading of your page. Most of the times, if you put the script tag in the head, when you load the page, the browser would load the JavaScript in the head because it's marked as priority. So it will load those elements before whatever thing you have to load in the body. And then maybe the element might be, it will be a heavy element. It might be big in size and all that. So it's always advisable to load your script tags in the body, at the end of the body, so that your page can load faster and then you can have a nice user experience. So that was it. We did all those things, these things in our last class, and then we used console.logs and all that. So I think there's also another one we normally use a lot, window.alert. So let's say if you want to output something, you can also use window.alert to output whatever you want to output. So let's say if I'm to use the scripts in the body, I'll uncomment this, and then I can use window.alert, and then I'll say hello world. So once I save this and I go to my once I go to my page, it will show this alert prompt which says hello world. So once you say this is also a way of communicating with your users if you have something to say. But then the way this works is that it would, once the page load, it would freeze everything and then bring this thing out until the user has interacted with it. It wouldn't let any other thing run in the background. So it will mostly be like it would freeze the screen and only show you the prompts. So we normally don't use it, but then when the need be for you to use this, you can also use this as well. All right. So let's get into today's topic. So as I said, we concluded on statements. So today we'll be starting with we concluded on output. So today we'll be starting with statements. So now I'm sure by now we know how to declare variables, put values in them, and all that. And then we said with our previous class that assigning values to variables is same thing as what we did or what we've been doing in mathematics. So it's the same. So you can say, let's say in math, you can have an integer x equals to 3, integer y equals to 5. It's the same thing here in JavaScript. So instead of bringing integer, the syntax for JavaScript says that you should use a let as a reserved keyword. So you can use the let, you can use a var, you can use a const, All these are reserved keywords that you can use to create a variable, and then you can put in values in them. So basic JavaScript syntax, you can have let x, y, z. Once you use let are all these are variables, so you can use let and then put them on one line. It would work, or it will work as you want it. And then once you declare them, you can now come to the next line and then you give them values. Because these are variables, they don't really expect you to assign values to them once you create them. But then with constants, you are required to provide a value once you create them. We will look at that. So this, we can see that he said let x, y, z equals to z. So this is the first line, and he terminated it with this. And then he came to the next line, he said x equal to 5, y is equal to 6. Now, if I want, then I'll put the summation of these two into the variable z. So with this, if you look at the code base for this, now today we'll be working mostly in the external JavaScript. I'm sure you were taught how to use the external JavaScript. If you come to your head section and then you write the script file, and then you specify the source to be the location of this external file, you'll be able to read this file in your HTML file, and then anything, any logic or anything you've written in here would apply here. So it's the same thing we are doing today. So we are using an external file called my script. So once we go to the my script, we have these statements. So let A, B, C all on one line, then A equals to 5, B equals to 6, and then for the C will be a summation of A and B. So once we save this, and then if you want to see them on the console, as we said the other time, we use console.log. This is very important if you want to see what you are doing. So if I want to see the summation of the A and B, I just come here, and then for the console.log syntax, this is a syntax by JavaScript, so you just have to follow. So you just have to do console.log, and then it will open a parenthesis with single quotes. It can also be a double quote. Either way works. So if you choose a single quote, you can then bring C equals to what? So you can bring C, and then outside of the single quote or the double quote, whichever way you want to specify, you bring a comma. So once you bring a comma, then you bring in the value, the variable you are trying to display to the console. So in this case, you want to display C. So you bring in C here, and then you terminate your work. So once we save this and we go to our console, you should see C11 here. So if you want to read your console well, you have to write whatever that's in the string, in the single quote or double quote well. So if I want to space, if I want to let myself know that I'm trying to log C, I can bring C and then a colon, right, and even a space, so that I will read it clearly. So if I do this and save and I come here, you can see that now C has a colon 11. So this gives you a nice view that, and for you to know that you are trying to log the value of C, which is a summation of A and B, right? So yeah, these are JavaScript statements, basic JavaScript statements you can expect in your code base, right? Then we come to this section, JavaScript program. So a computer program is a list of instructions to be executed by a computer. In a programming language, these programming instructions are called statements. So what we just did is a statement. A statement is basically a group of instructions that's to be executed. So in this case, we had z equals to x plus y. So this is a statement. It has a variable z that wants the summation of the variable x and y to be executed and then assigned to it. So once you see 1 equal to symbol, as we taught in the introduction to programming, it means assignment. So whatever that's on your right hand side is assigned to the left hand side. A equals to B, so it means whatever B is, we are assigning to the variable A. It's the same thing, x equals to x plus, z equals to x plus y. So whatever that's on the right hand side, we are trying to assign it. We are giving it into the variable or container z, so that we can have a new value for this container variable. So basically that's what you're doing, and this forms a statement. This is a statement in JavaScript. This first one, y equals to 6, is also a statement. So as you can see, we have different type of statements, and then a collection of them is what's a computer, that is what constitutes a computer program, a collection of statements that's performing something, basically. So a JavaScript program is a list of programming statements. That's all a JavaScript program does. So JavaScript statements we've done on top. We can have basic statements, and even what we learned initially, where we use the document.get element by ID, and then we provide the ID of the document, and then we do the .inner HTML. This is a statement as well, because this is executing something. It's putting this hello dolly dot into the element with the ID demo. So it's basically a JavaScript statement. And then as we were taught, we have to terminate our work. In JavaScript, it's advisable for you to be terminating your work. Termination means you have to bring a colon so that the JavaScript code will know that you are done with a line, and then whatever that comes on is a new line. So it's a way to make your compiler or the JavaScript aware of the lines you are working with. Once you bring a colon, it separates a statement from the other. So semicolons separate JavaScript statements. So you can have multiple statements on one line, but then if you want to separate them, you can use a colon. If you don't use a colon, then you have to separate them with lines. So you have to make sure your next statement goes on the next line. So as we've seen here, we could have done all this in one line here. We could have done all this in one line. The commenting part, we'll come to it. The reason why I'm taking out the comments, I'll explain it later. So if I take out this commented side and then bring it here, this is all valid. So once we save this, we should have the same response again. C is equal to 11 because we are separating the LM statement by colon. So the JavaScript knows that after A is equal to B, this is a statement on its own. B equals to C is a statement on its own, and C equals to A plus B is a statement on its own. So it will execute this, put the value in C, and then if we come here, let's even put this here and see something. So we also put the console log on the same line. We come here, we reload, and it's still giving us 11. So it means doing this is very correct. But then, as you can tell, going forward, you might have a very large code base, or you might do a lot in this code, right? And then if you keep on putting everything in one line, your code might not be readable. You enforce a lot of things in one line. So the ideal situation is to put things on each line so that they are separated and it can be read very well, right? So yeah, that's it about JavaScript statements. So we can have some examples here. And then in JavaScript statements, usually we don't really, in JavaScript statements, we don't really use white lines. We most of the time ignore multiple spaces, right, which are white lines. So if we see let person equals to a space and then the double quotes and then the name of the person, it's the same thing as you deleting that space and then now deleting the spaces before the equal to and after the equal to. These two are the same because JavaScript doesn't really take care of the white spaces. However, if there was a white space after the first quote, then it would really take it into consideration because it means you are trying to tell JavaScript that the name of the person has a white space inside. So doing this, let's come here. If we come here and you uncomment this guy, right, and then we do, so let's just be person, let this person 1, person 2, right? So these two would have the same. So if you want to show this in a console, I guess you guys know. So console.log, then first parameter is the name of your console. If you don't want to give it a name, if you don't want to give your console log names, you can always just put in a value here straightforward. So person 1, then you put it here, then you comment it, then person 2. So person 2, you come here, then you put it here. So this wouldn't name your console logs. It will just print out the value straightforward. So if I come here, you see Hege, right? Now, if I bring a space here, and this, let's see something. So now you see that JavaScript has given it the spacing in front and behind because we put the spacing in between the double quotes. signifying that we want to add spaces, white spaces to the name. So this JavaScript can't really take off the white spacing, but then this white spacing here is really redundant because it was the same thing. We took out the white space here in the line 16 where we deleted the white space before the equal to and after the equal to. So that's basically it about statements. Statements don't really factor white spaces around the operators and the names of the values and all that. But then if it's inside the value, it will take it into consideration. Yeah. Any questions so far? Today we're moving very fast because most of these things we did them in the introduction to programming. So yeah, if there are any questions, let me know. Come again. Okay, I believe there's no question, so let's continue.
Hello.
Now, yeah, hello, yeah, Peter. Is it Peter? Hello, you can speak.
Hello.
Yeah, hello.
Okay. Yes. About the statement. You realize that in maths, if we say that let person A equals to Hege, it means that Hege is also equal to person 1. Is it also true here?
Come again with your question. I didn't get the last part.
Okay, so in mathematics, what I'm saying is that if we say that let person 1 equals it means that Hege is also equal to person 1.
Okay, so the Hege you're talking about, the Hege in this state is just a value, right? So the Hege is just a value that has been assigned to the container. So we've placed the string Hege in a container person 1. So if the Hege was a variable on its own, then you can say that now Hege is equal to person 1. Because Hege is a variable, and a variable can be equal to another variable. But then if you're saying a value is equal to a variable, the value is what needs to be contained in a variable. Do you get it? So we can have something like this. Let Hege equal to person 1. I want you to get something here, right? So what we are trying to say, you are trying to give a reverse assignment to them, right? Hello.
Yes,
So now, for what you said, it can be that's when with what I've written here, this when you can say that now Hege equals to person 1 equals to Hege, right? Because Hege in this state is also a variable. So a variable can be equal to another variable and vice versa. But then a variable being equal to a value, we can't say that the value is equal to the variable, because how are you going to call the value? The value hasn't been contained in anything yet, unless the value is a variable. It's something you can hold. Do you get it? Hello.
Yes, I've got it.
Yeah,
so in the
yeah, continue. I'm listening.
Okay, so for the last instance where we have person 1 equals, if you call console.person1, what will it give you?
After this, are you saying after this here?
Yes. And
so you call console, okay, .log. So now, what are you logging? What do you want us to log?
Person 1.
Person 1. Person 1. Okay, so now if you are logging person 1, and person 1 has was assigned the variable Hege, right? And then we assign Hege as a variable was assigned person 1. No, I'm trying to explain it to you. So if we come to person 1 was assigned with a value Hege. Then we came to line 16. Hege was assigned with the value person 1. And line 17 says that person 1 now is equal to Hege. This Hege here is a variable here. So now person 1 will be equal to person 1 here, no longer Hege. Do you get it? Let's log this and see. You will get it. Okay, so let me check this out. All right. So Now let's go. Let's see. I'm logging any person to here. Okay, so this needs to go away. Yeah. So do you get it? Person 1 now becomes Hege because I assign Hege as a variable with its content to person 1. Even though initially we assigned Hege to person 1, we changed it here. So if I hadn't done this and I hadn't done this here, then person 1 will still remain Hege because we haven't changed it after the assignment, right? Hello. Yeah. So do you follow it? Do you follow what's happening here? I didn't get you.
Okay, so if you comment let person 1 equals Hege out, and you comment let Hege equals to person 1, and it's left with person 1 equals Hege, what will happen?
So you want me to comment this guy? You want me to comment this one?
Yes.
Line 16, right?
15.
And line what? And line 15.
Line 15, yes.
Okay. And then line 17 also goes away, or it stays?
It stays.
It stays. So now, okay, so you said person equals to Hege. Now person is a variable. Hege is expected to be a variable too. Person 1 is also expected to be a variable. Now we are saying person 1 should be equal to Hege. Now where are they? Where were they declared? You've not declared them, so it's undefined. So you can assign an undefined to an undefined. Do you get it? So this would give us Hege is undefined. It will give us an error, reference error. We are trying to reference a variable Hege which is not defined. The Hege, we are trying to assign the value of the Hege into person 1, but Hege has not been defined, and even person 1 too has not been defined. So you get a reference error on this Hege. But if we have done this, now Hege is defined, right? Hege is defined to be person 1. So now person 1 would have a value of Hege, which is person 1. So if you come here, we can get person 1 here. Do you understand? Hello?
Yes, sir, I'm with you.
Yeah. So you realize that there's something we didn't even say here. That person 1, we never declared it. We never declared it to be a variable. But then because Hege was declared and it was first mentioned here in line 17, if we assign the value of Hege into it, JavaScript will declare the person 1 for us and will make it a valid variable, and then it will be in scope. Because what we are trying to assign into it is a valid variable, like it's been declared. So whatever you assign it to, whether it has been declared or not, JavaScript will automatically declare it for us. So we realize that we didn't get an error here. Person 1 now becomes valid. It's in scope. It has been declared for us, but we didn't do anything like let person 1 be equals to empty array, or we didn't declare person 1 at all. But then it was able to be valid here. Do you get it? All right. So let's move ahead. All right. So that's it with statements. You can manipulate statements here anyhow you want, but then you make sure that you are in the right scope, and then you're able to know whatever you assign to a variable needs to be declared. If it's not declared, then you get a reference error because what you are trying to assign is not declared. If what you're trying to assign to something is a variable, it needs to be declared. Yeah. All right. And then, yeah, we can have JavaScript line length and then line breakers, right? So if you realize that what you're typing in a statement is too long, you can break it into a next line right after the operator or right after the separator of the statement. So you realize that every statement has a left-hand side and a right-hand side. So per the statement we had here, right? So we had let Hege equals to person 1, right? And then we had person 1 equals to this. So we realized if I wanted to break this, I could have broken it right after the middle part, the joining operator. So I could have done this, and then this will still be valid, I could have also done this here. So JavaScript will know that it has to merge the two because we are trying to join the two, and the line has been broken, and then it can be joined with the existence of the operator that's separating the two statements. So that's one thing you can also take into consideration. There are a lot when it comes to statements, so I think with time you can go through the rest and then you get to understand them more. Now, the next part of what we want to talk about today is code blocks, right? So if you hear code block in JavaScript or even in programming language, it's basically a group of it's basically to group statements into one scope or domain, and it's usually characterized by using the curly brackets, right? So this curly bracket we use in mathematics and all that. We can also repeat it. We can use the same curly bracket for defining a code block. And you ask yourself, where can you see a code block? It's usually seen in objects and even in functions. So once you declare a function and you bring this curly braces, it basically means you declare the code block, and then within that code block, any statement in between will be executed together. So JavaScript statement can be put together in code blocks inside curly braces. The purpose for code blocks is to define statements to be executed together. So once you find statements put together in blocks in JavaScript functions. So for example, with this function, there's a function which is a reserved word, and then the name of the function, my function. And then per the syntax, you bring a parenthesis and then followed by an opening curly brace. So once you open the curly brace, anything inside statement that will be executed together. So from top to bottom, if there were 8 lines, they'll be executed from line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4 up to the last line. And then once it sees this closing curly braces, it knows that this is the end of the function because it has been because it's a closing statement to the opening statement here, which is the opening curly brace here. So it's very important in JavaScript because opening curly braces in JavaScript basically means that you've basically created a scope, and a scope is a group. It's like it's an environment where variables can exist or where a group of code can be executed together. And you can't always put your whole function logic into one scope. You can group them into different functions so that you can call them when you need them and all that. I think we spoke a lot about this in the introduction to programming. So you can use scope to define methods, function methods, and all that. So that's something you should know in JavaScript. We have code blocks, and then they are basically characterized by the use of curly braces. So we'll be using it a lot to create our function and then execute our functions in JavaScript. All right. Let's move on to the next one. Yeah. So now JavaScript has some reserved keywords that you should always look out for, right? So most JavaScript statements often start with these keywords to identify what actions we are about to perform, right? So there's a keyword reference for JavaScript. This is also available for all the different type of programming languages. So for every programming language, you should know the list of reserved keywords that you don't need to use for probably naming your variables because it will throw an error. Those words cannot be touched because they already have meanings to them, and then they are being used by the programming language, right? So if you come to this reference part of W3 Schools, you see all the JavaScript reserved keywords and then what they do and all that. So here, these are some of the known keywords that we'll be using for our course, right? So we have var, which basically declares a variable, and we have let, which declares a block variable. So we just define the code blocks. So once there's a code block, if there's a code block and you declare a variable using the keyword let, means this let, the variable is only functional in this code block using the keyword let. But then if you use var is a universal it becomes a universal variable. You can use it anywhere, even outside of the code block. But then once you use let, it's only valid within the scope. So these are some of the things we look out for. And then if you use const to declare a variable, we are declaring the variable to be a constant. It will never change again. So that should be the final value of that variable. means that for the entire lifetime of that variable, it would be the same value you assign to it. So let's see something here. So we declare a variable. The first variable we declare using the var is variable, right? And this can be anything. And we declare another one with a block variable. Now, this block variable is only available within a scope. And then for this function, my JavaScript, there's no scope here. So meaning for the lifetime of this function that we've called here, the variable block scope is available within this. However, if we had declared this in a, let's say, a function scope function, right? And then we declared a variable, this let's here. So let's scope variable equals to scope variable, right? And we can, let's see if we can get it here. So let's log the scope variable. So for this console log, it's what you'll be using it a lot in JavaScript, because you always want to see whatever value a variable is holding at every point in time. So you can always use console log to see what you are logging. So now we want to log the variable within this function, and also we want to log one outside here. Now let's see what's going to happen. So scope variable outside, and the scope variable inside. Right. Now we have to call, now with functions, I think we'll get to that, but then let me say this quick. Functions, once you define a function, that's not all. You need to call it, because this has already been defined. Now, how do we execute a function? We have to call it sample. So we can do that by just calling this function right here. So you call it, and then you bring the parentheses, the brackets, right? So if you bring it, it means you've called it. This is a calling function. So in function, we have a called function and calling function, right? So once we call it here, it means it will execute whatever content we have in this function. So in view of that, let me bring this here, and let's see something. So if we go to our code base and we reload, so we realize that the block variable outside came as undefined, but then the block function inside came as scope variable, simply because the let we use here has scoped the variables content, has scoped the variables range only within this function. So we can only use this variable within this function, scope function. If you call it outside of this function, we don't know what scope variable is outside of this function, because you're using let. Now let's use var and see something. If var will break. So I think var 2 didn't, yeah. So I think it's always best to call functions. Now if you wanted to make, so because this function was, this variable was declared within this function, it's local to this function. So if you call it outside, we wouldn't get it unless we make this a global variable. So if you make it global, then it means this has been defined globally, right? So wherever you call it, whether in this function or outside of this function, it should be available for us to use. So once you do that, you realize that both variables are now giving values as we expect. Any questions so far? Let's move ahead real quick. Any questions? All right, so now with the keywords, we have var, let, const, and we have if for writing our logics. We have switch also for switching between variable values. And we have for our for loops, function, the name function as reserved for creating functions. We have return word for returning values in a function and then exiting the value in the function. So once you see any return statement anywhere, it means we are telling you that, hey, wherever that you are, come out of it. So if you're in a function, we tell you to come out of the function. If you're in a loop, we tell you to come out of the loop. Wherever that you find yourself in and you see return, we are telling you to that. We are telling you to exit it. It means you are done with all the operations you are doing. So now you can come out and then give us a value and let us use it. So let's see an example of that. So with this scope function, we could have always tell it to. So after you are done with this scope function, return me the string I am scoped. Right? So you are returning a string from this function. So whoever calls this function will get this I am scoped as a value from the calling of the function. So now, you know, variables can contain anything. They can always contain, they can contain anything you can think of, whether a number, a string, or even a function. So we can declare another variable here. So let's say, let my calling function. We also come to the variables. We'll come to that so that you know what are the preferred way of naming variables in JavaScript. So if you declare this variable, my calling function, and then you assign it to whatever the content of this scoped function is. And now once we call this, let's log the content of this my calling function. Who is that? You can mute yourself. Gloria, kindly mute yourself here. Have any question, you can let me know. If not, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so once we call this my calling function and then we bring this comma, you should always know the syntax of this console.log. The name, comma, and the value. If you don't want any name, you just put in the value there straightforward. So now I want to log this guy, this variable that is being assigned with the content of this calling function. So now let's remove this guy here, and then now let's run our code. Voila, you see my calling function has the value I am scoped because we are returning this value as the final result of whatever we did in this function to be the content of this function. So anywhere we call this function, we will have I am scoped because that's the value we return. We could have decided not to return anything. We just execute some statements in this function, and then that's all. We don't do anything. But then if you want to like climax whatever we are doing in a function, then we'll bring a return statement which will return whatever you want to return to whoever called the function, right? So that's one thing we have to take note with JavaScript statements. So as you said, so the return here becomes a keyword. You can't do something like let or var return equals to 1. Let me use 2. You see, JavaScript has given us a warning that return is not allowed as a variable declaration name because it's a reserved keyword. So we can't use the name return to name your variables. So we can use that. And there's also a try. There's a keyword. There's a reserved keyword called try, which implements error handling. So I think there's an example here we can take a quick look at. So all this will make more sense once we start writing some proper logical reasoning code. Once we start writing some logics in our code base, you'll see what to do. So for the if else, I'm sure we've already seen it in our introduction to programming class. So normal if statement with a bracket, and then you put in your statement. So the statement here is we are checking if block constant variable is greater than 5. Now where is this block constant variable? I think we have it declared here. So initially we set it to what, 10. Then we check if block constant is greater than 5. Console out I am bigger. Else console out I am smaller. So let's run this real quick and see what we see. So we had I am bigger because the block constant, which is a constant, take a look at this, it's a constant, so it will never change. So this block constant will always be 10. Then we'll check if in some part of our code we want to verify if it's greater than 5. If it's greater than 5, then we'll log out this statement to the console, or we can do something here. It's not always about logging out. We use these if statement to control the logical flow in our code. So if something is greater than 10, maybe I would want to send an information to something, or I want to display some text to the page, or I want to do something else, I want to do something else. So it's just like the normal everyday communication with something or decision making. If I don't have money, I'm not going out. Else, if I have money, I'll go out. Simple as that. So it's the same thing we do here, and we can use this reserved keyword if to do that. So that's it for the if. And then we also have something we call switch. So realize that there's a switch also here. So switch basically, the syntax of switch is it would check for a given variable, and then for the different scenarios that you can expect from the variable, we would execute something. So here we have a variable called city, right? And then we say that prompt enter your city. So this is another keyword. This is a function, and this is a feature of JavaScript which basically let us interact with our console, right? So once you see prompts in JavaScript, it basically means that it would give you an interface for you to enter something, just like a normal input in the forms that we did earlier on in HTML. But in this case, we are not the ones rendering the form. JavaScript itself will bring us a prompt that will let us enter something into the prompt. So let's see how it works here. So we can have, please, I hope everything is okay. If there's any confusion, you can pause me so that we can go over it. Because this class, as I said, it will be very fast because we are way behind time. So per the prompt that I specified, you could see that this is giving us a prompt here, and it has given us an input field. So it's saying that enter your city. So let's say I'm in Accra, and then I click on OK. Now see what happens. Then it prints this to console. You are in Greater Accra region. How did we get to print this thing out? It was because of the switch cases that we specified here. So switch syntax states that you bring a switch keyword, you bring your variable you want to test. So here we are testing the value of this variable city. So whatever information that was entered in the prompt, we will run some test cases. So for case Accra. Accra here is basically for case that for situations where the city name is Accra, exactly like this ACC, capital A, small CCRA. If someone enters the ACCRA as the city name, then let's print this to console. So this is just another form of writing if. You know, for the if statement, we can have multiple. We can have if, else, if, else, if. We can have something like this: if, else, if block constant is greater than 7, let's say 7. Then let's do this. I'm coming. Then let's. I'm slightly bigger, right? We can also have another else if. Else if then your statement statement goes here. Else if block constant is greater than 9. Then there's another thing we have to take care of. So we can say almost bigger, right? Then else, it means once you are not greater than 5, means you are definitely small. Then we do this. So this can go on and on and on and on till you are tired of writing it, right? And this doesn't really look cool. So let me see. Okay. So you can have something like this, and clearly you can see that this is becoming redundant because why do you want to repeat if else for like 1,000 times, right? So in order to prevent these plenty things, JavaScript provides us with this switch, which basically switch between a set of conditions in a nice way. So this, you realize that it's a switch statement and it has case. So whatever your case is, just put in the value you expect for any of the cases. So if the case here means that you entered Accra for the city, console log this. If you entered Kumasi for the city, console log this. If you entered Cape Coast for the city, console log this. And have this important side, which is the default. Default here is if we check and all the values you provided for the city wasn't present for any of these cases, then we'll rely on this. So this is more of like an else. The else in the if else statements we know. So this else here. So this is the last one of the if statements. Then we can, so else, if all didn't match, then we can execute whatever is between the default and side of this switch. So basically we can reload this page and block statements. Let me take this guy off. Okay. So let me enter any dummy text. So you realize that. Let me reload this. This block. Why is it? So when I'm coming. Okay, yeah. So that's it. So for a new reloaded page, if we enter any junk values, you realize that a print we don't know where you are. Try again. So this was rendered with the default case. So that's it for the switch. I think we've done all this, but then I just need to go over so that you know some of the reserved words for JavaScript statements. Right? Any questions so far? Let's move to the next level. If there are no questions, any questions? Okay, I believe there are no questions, so let's go on to the next one. So we have syntax, JavaScript syntax. So the syntax are basically all that we've been trying to go over. So how to declare a variable, what are the reserved words you have to use. So for variable, you can either use a var, a let, or a const. So this should be it's a syntax. You can't do much about it because you're not the one who read language. So you just have to go with what the language expects you to do, just like how we learned mathematics. There are things that you just have to know. You don't really, if you want explanation, they will give you that this is the preferred way we want you to do things. So you just have to know and then make use of it. So for variable declarations, we have these keywords for you to use. And then, so for values, for JavaScript values, we have two types, right? We have fixed values and then variable values. Any question? I realized someone was trying to talk. Okay. So we have fixed values and then variable values. So now for fixed values, they can also be called literal. So for fixed values, they are what they are. I mean, they are fixed. You can't really do much about them. These are values. So for example, for the values, for the literal or for the literals or the fixed values, we can have numbers. I mean, so for the number 10.50, we can't really do much about this number because that is how you write 10.5 in mathematics. For 1001, this is how you write it. You can't really change it. If you change this to any other number, then it means that's a new value. So these are constant or these are fixed values you can get in JavaScript values. And then for the variable values, that's when we have the keyword called variables. So we've been talking about variables. That's what they are, all values. But then for variables, they can change. They are varying. I mean, variables will vary for several factors or for several anything you can think of, you can assign it to the variable. So they are changing, they are dynamic, they are not static. So these are the two different values, JavaScript values you should take notice of. Who Peter, can you go on mute? Sorry, but I'm hearing myself talk. All right. Yeah, so those are JavaScript values. So we have the fixed values and then the varying values, right? So for the values we have for JavaScript, we basically have numbers and strings. That's what we'll be using most of the time. So we will get into that. So for JavaScript variables, as we said earlier on, for a variable declaration, you can use var, let, const to declare a variable. This we know so far, so I don't think it should be a problem. Now operators, we spoke about this when we did the introduction to programming languages. So for the operators, they are just for JavaScript, arithmetic operators is the same thing we have in mathematics. So the plus, the minus, the multiplication, the division to compute values. And now there's something you have to take note here that for the operators, we use the same concept from math. So anytime you're dealing with operators, you think of board math. I don't know if you know your math well, you know that the same thing applies to this. So for example, with this bracket 5 plus 6 all multiplied by 10, you should know that JavaScript will execute this the same way mathematics would also execute this, right? So if you know your maths and anything you know in maths applies here. So for this, if you are to execute this, I think you will get, let me see, where do we have this? Yeah, so for you to execute this, let me take this guy off. we execute just this line, this statement. Okay, so let's log this to the console. So as you can see, I wanted to see the value of this result, but then since I'm not logging it to the console, nothing came here. So for logging to console is something you should always be mindful of. Like if you want to see what you are doing, so results, I want to log something called result, and then I put in whatever I execute here. And you should know that console log also has the same execution power as the normal lines you have in JavaScript. So if I want to do something on a normal line like this, it's the same way it will be executed if I put in a console log here. It's the same thing, or if probably I didn't even decide to name this, if I just put it inside console log, it will be the same as me executing it here. But however, this will show it to me on the console. This will show to me on the console, and in our case, our console here is our browser console. If we are using another environment to run our JavaScript, it will also show us the same thing. So just have to know that whatever you can run on a normal line, you can also run inside console log. So once we do this, we can see that this is the output 110. So this uses the same syntax. This uses the same concept of board mass, right? Board mass. So bracket of division. So we do the bracket first. 5 plus 6 is equal to what? 11. Then we come out, then we simplify it. 11 times 10 is equal to 110. So that's the answer we have here. So basically, operators it has the same concept of normal mathematics. So once you know that, you can apply it here, and then we can probably save this in a variable. So everything you want to do in JavaScript, you can always think of you putting it inside a variable and then use the variable later to execute something. So you have execution results, right, equals to this. So whatever we have here, put it in here, and now we can log the results here as what's the result of my execution. I always like to label my console log so that I know what I'm dealing with. If you don't label them, then they become plain and you don't know what you are logging and all that. So once we come here, execution result is 110. So we just did an execution of some basic of some statements using basic JavaScript operators, and then we put a value inside the result inside the JavaScript variable, and then we printed it to console. Straightforward. So there are a lot here. You can read ahead on the JavaScript syntaxes that we have. We've gone through a lot of them. For example, there's commenting. We know how to comment in JavaScript. We just apply the double / for single line commenting. And if you want to do a group commenting, we can use / and a star symbol, and then at the end of where you want to stop your commenting, you do a star and a /. This will comment everything inside the line, and then it will make it available for JavaScript to execute them. So these are all things you already know, right? Any questions so far? Okay, there are no questions. Okay, so JavaScript identifiers names. So identifiers are JavaScript name. Identifiers are used to name variables and keywords and functions. The rule of legal names are the same in most programming languages. So a JavaScript name must always begin with a letter ranging from A to Z. That's capital A to capital Z, or it could be from small a to small z. You can use any of these letters to start naming a variable. We are concerned with the starting letter of a variable name, because it needs to be valid. The rest could be anything, but then for the start, we really need to make sure that it's a valid keyword. And then you can start with any letter from A to Z, capital A to Z, or from small a to Z. You can start with a $sign. This is a symbol. There are some symbols you can start with, others you can't. So these are the preferred way of naming a variable. Naming any variable or assigning names, basically. And then you can also use an underscore. So if you want to declare a variable and name it underscore initial, you can always do that, and it will be a valid variable for you to use. So you could have done this underscore execution. Do you realize even there was an underscore in between the execution and results? because underscore is a valid symbol to be used for the naming of variables. It could also work like that. So this comes here, then our variable name is this underscore that. So this is a rule of thumb. You just have to follow. There's not much for you to. Yeah, substituent characters may be letters, digits, underscore, or $sign. So it means that you can't start naming names in JavaScript with letters. So you can't start with, let's say, I want to name this 0 execution. This is not valid. So you can even say that VS Code underlined it and then give you a warning. They get expected, because what are you trying to do? We have 0. 0 can be the starting of a name of a variable. So that makes it void, right? So that's something you should know. And JavaScript is case sensitive in that mixing small letter, you can't take a small letter word for a capital letter word. There are two different things. So a variable name, last name, starting with small l, is not the same as the one that will start with capital L. There are two different containers because these are variables. The name matters. So whatever letter you use to name your variable, you need to make sure that it's the same thing you use throughout. If you change any letter within them, it becomes a different variable altogether, right? So there are so many of them here, and then we have ways of naming our names, right? So as we said, there's a rule of thumb here. You follow these three rule here. Use a letter A to Z, both small letters and capital letters. You can use a $sign, or you can use an underscore, and then the subsequent letters can be any of these. Meaning you can start with 0. You can start with numbers, digits, right? And then also they are case sensitive. So if you can't mix capital letters with small letters and then you think that it's supposed to be the same thing. This one has a capital N here. This one has a small n here. So they are two different variable names. They are never the same. And then if you want to, so here we realize that we have a scheme. So here it started with L and the name started with capital N. So this we have something called camel case naming. So for camel case, you know how a camel looks like. The middle side is very, very long, and then the head is way below. So it's something like that. I mean, it's a jargon in JavaScript that you should know, and then it's a way of naming variables, or providing names to anything you can think of. So for there's an underscore where you use underscore to name. So you can provide underscore to separate names. So you realize that first and name are two different words in English, but then if you want to combine them to form a name, you can use underscore to separate them, but then they all represent one variable name or one name. Same thing as last name, MasterCard, Intercity. And then for the camel case, right? So there's a camel case in here. So here there's an upper camel case where the first letter of every word we are combining to form a name starts with a capital letter. So there's a capital F here, capital N here. Same thing with last name, capital I here, capital N, MasterCard. So here, this is a scheme of naming names. You can also have the lower camel case name where you have so it starts with small letter for the first word, and then for the subsequent words, they all start with capital letters. So these are some things you can, take notes of. Yeah. Any questions so far? Peter, are you on board? Is anything worry you? Are you okay? Gloria, no, you're not talking that much. I don't know if you're okay. And Emmanuel, I've not heard from you today. Gloria, Emmanuel, Peter. Gloria, are you okay? I think you're on mute. If you are talking, you're on mute, so you have to unmute yourself. Yeah, hello.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay, that's fine. That's brilliant. Yeah. All right. So then our next section will be JavaScript comments. So we've already done this. We know how to comment, single line commenting, multiple lines commenting. I think it's okay. We can move to the next one. So variables, we've already spoke about. We have 4 ways of declaring variables in JavaScript. We can use var reserved keyword to declare a variable. Let use all the keyword. And yeah, so the basic JavaScript statements, everything is here for you to for you to know. Right. And then and the identifier, so that's JavaScript variables must be identified with unique names, right? So these unique names are called identifiers. So identifiers can be short names like X and Y, or more descriptive names like age, sum, total volume. Yeah, so just as we spoke about them, and then how to name them, make sure there's no digit starting with the name of anything, whether a variable or a function. There shouldn't be a letter, or there shouldn't be a digit, a number starting as the name of that particular entity you want to name, right? And we have the assignment operator. So once you see equal to in JavaScript, it means that we are assigning whatever that's on the left-hand side. We are assigning whatever that's on the right-hand side to the left-hand side. So x equals to x plus 5. It means we've already defined x, and x has some value. So whatever value x had, we are adding 5 to it, and then we are reassigning it to the letter x. So all these things, I'm sure they are okay. Now, data types in JavaScript. So JavaScript can hold numbers like 100 and text value like John Doe. So 100 here is a number, and then John Doe here is a string. So these are the two basic data types we work with in JavaScript. There are more data types as you go ahead, but then for basics, you can always get this. I think we went over this in our introduction to programming, and then they all apply here. So all the different type of data types that you can think of in JavaScript, they are mostly same. I think there are a bit of a difference as compared to the other programming language, but then I think they are basically the same thing, right? So we can have this const pi equals to 3.14. This is a number. It's a floating number, but then at the end of the day, it has a data type of number. Let person equals to John Doe. This is a string. Let answer equals to yes, I am. This is also a string, because even though they have one has double quote and one has single quote, they are all strings in JavaScript. Yeah, so I think we can move ahead. All these are same thing statement. We've already gone through this. Value equals to undefined. Yeah. Now, so this is very critical. You have to go right. So when you declare a variable in JavaScript and you don't assign any value to it, the initial value of this variable is undefined. Now let's break it down and see what you are doing, what we are talking about here. So we have car name here, right? So let car name, and then we terminated it. So if we console log this car name here, right, we expect to get undefined. Undefined is a reserved keyword. So as you can see, we are trying to log the value of the variable. What? Oh no, there's something up here. Yeah, this is what's. Yeah, we are trying to log the value of the variable car name, but we didn't assign it into car name. So JavaScript will slap this value here. This is not a value. It's just telling us that the car name variable is undefined. We've not defined any value to it. So this is the current state of this variable. So the undefined can always. So undefined basically is a value, right, which is assigned to a variable that has no values assigned to it. So once you create a variable, you should always make sure that you instantiate or you assign a value to it. Assigning a value to a variable you created can all be done in one line. So instead of doing this, just let car name, you could have done let car name equals to, it can even be, so car name will be nothing. So in JavaScript, you can always assign now. This is also a reserved keyword in JavaScript. You are basically telling you that I have a container, but then for starters, I'm not assigning anything to it. So this is the value of it. It's now. Now is a value type, which means nothing. There's nothing inside the container variable. Or you can even assign undefined. So undefined too is undefined too is a reserved keyword in JavaScript. That basically lets you know that the variable you are dealing with is undefined. I've not yet defined anything for this variable. So once you see and you want to interact with it, you should know that it's unassigned. Yeah. So these are something you should know. So in programming languages, variables are often declared without a value. The value can be something that has to be calculated or something that will be provided later, like user input. A variable declared without a value will have the value undefined. So undefined here is a value, which means it's nothing. There's nothing available for that. All right. So we are going with this with the B3 school because we would want to start from the beginning and let you guys have all the understanding you need to know before we delve into the other complex topics, right? So per all that they have here, I think you've already gone through them. The variables, we know how to declare a variable, what to use to start the naming of a variable, how to declare and reassign values to a variable and all that. Now, this dollar here is a special case in that in some library in JavaScript, which is jQuery, library using the dollar has a different meaning. So I think that's why they wanted to throw more light on this. So since JavaScript treats a dollar like a letter, identifiers containing dollar are valid variable names. So if you see any variable which has dollar in JavaScript, you should know that it's a valid variable. However, if you go into a programming languages, if you go into a framework which is called jQuery, it's a framework for JavaScript. It's another framework in JavaScript that has its own way of doing things. If you go there and you go and use dollar to create a variable, you might get so many errors because they are treating the dollar symbol as a reserved word for that particular library. So you should always bear in mind, once you are doing vanilla JavaScript, all the JavaScript you are doing now is vanilla JavaScript. It's raw-based JavaScript. You are not adding any framework or library yet. In future, we want to extend into React so that we can know how React also, React, which is also a JavaScript library, will also have its own way or syntax of doing things. Okay, so I think we've treated a lot today. The let variable name, we've already gone through it, right? But before that, any questions so far? I think I have to know if we are all on the same page. If there are any difficulties, let me know. If not, we can go ahead and then complete a few more. Okay, there are no questions, so let's continue. Yeah, so the let, as we know, is the same thing we've said, let constants, all this, but then there's a special explanation to the let keyword, right? So JavaScript, as we know, is a programming language, but then it has updates, right? So for the early stages of JavaScript for the JavaScript language, we didn't have the keyword let and then const, right? So we're using var to almost name every variable in JavaScript. But then from 2005, when ES6, which is ECMA 6 was released for JavaScript. So anytime you hear ECMA scripts, ECMA 6, ECMA 2015, you should know that it's an update of JavaScript. The language was updated. Basically means that they added more functionality to the programming language, right? I mean, people are always making sure that the use of the language is being bettered and being made simpler for people to use. So the let keyword was added when they released this version of JavaScript, which is ESS. So ESS has its own way of doing things, and in addition to that, it also added these keywords. So the let keyword was introduced into ES6 2015, and then variables defined with let cannot be redeclared. Once you declare a variable with let, you can't redeclare that same variable again because it has already been declared. So you just have to call the variable name alone, and then if you want to reassign the values, you reassign. But then for the declaration, you can't redeclare. If you say declaration, it's basically you writing this statement: let car name equals to undefined. Or let's put a real value here, Volvo. Now you can't come here and do let car name here equals to Benz. No, we can't do this because this let has already been defined. We've already allocated this variable name into the programming language, right? So if you want to reassign the values, you can do so, but you don't have to redeclare. So this is declared variable, right? And then this is reassigning value. So the value was Volvo and we assign it to Benz. So this is valid, but then we can't redeclare the variable name here. The JavaScript doesn't allow for that. So these are some of the features that came with the let keyword. So it's the same thing with const. So const also has some features that you need to look out for when we are using them, right? So all these are, I think all these are reading topics. We can always read on them and then get to know how things work in JavaScript. So the same thing, so these are the few things you have to look out for. The let keyword. Variables with let cannot be redeclared. You cannot accidentally redeclare a variable with let. You can do this. And then with the constant too, it's the same, it's almost similar. Const was also added in ES6. That was in 2015. And then variables defined with const cannot be redeclared exactly because they are fixed values. Once you declare them, that's all. You can't redeclare them again. Variables defined with const cannot be reassigned. So you realize that with the let, we're able to reassign another value to this. But then if we had declared this with another, so car model, right? So the car model is, you can say Benz, yeah. So Benz will be the car model forever and ever. I can't come here and come and, oh, I've changed my mind. So car model now should be equals to Nissan. I do this, I'm going to get an error in JavaScript. So I think it should even throw in the error. So So we get an error. So this is a type error. So JavaScript, always, whichever error that you get with JavaScript, they give you a type. So this is a type error. Assignment to constant variable. We can't reassign a new value to a constant variable. Once we assign a constant, it should be like that for the rest of the lifetime of this variable, but we can't reassign. So these are some of the features we have to look out for these reserved keywords. That's the let and the const. Apart from that, you can use them to use them on variables anyway, anyhow you want, but then you just need to look out for these particular features they come with. Yeah. Any questions so far? I think it's almost nice. So if there are no questions, any questions so far? Sorry. Was there anything that you didn't get clearly, or was there anything that you still have issues with? Just let me know so that I can go over them and then we can call it a wrap for today. Peter, Gloria, Emmanuel. Hello.
Yes, yes, I'm okay.
That's fantastic. Right. So I think so far so good. We've done a whole lot on the introduction bits. I think majority of the topics here are all the same. They are focusing on some of the key factors in JavaScript, the cons, the operators. We've done all these things. There's no need to go over there. I think you can always read on them yourself. You realize that the same thing we're talking about them. Operators, we did them in introduction, the type of operators you can use in JavaScript. Assignment operators, if you use one equal to, you are assigning a value. If you use plus equal to, it's a reassignment of the same value with a different variable. So all these things we did it in our introduction classes. So you just have to read on them. So I think from this next, since okay, so I think operators, arithmetic, we've done all these guys. in our previous classes. So I'm sure you should be able to know how to double in some of these things, right? Today we have to take an assignment home. So let me see. Let me see. Let's go to our class and see if people are really following, because it looks like everyone here feels like they are okay. So I want us to take some assignments home today, right? So we currently have our Bootstrap class, right? So I want us to. So the last Bootstrap class that we used was I think start Bootstrap. Yeah, start Bootstrap agency.gh.pages. That's what Amos shared with us. So let's use the same file, and then let me see something here. So let's use the same file, right? So let's download the same file again, and then since we've already started it with Bootstrap, for the styling and then for the HTML, I believe we are all okay with that topic now. So for the JavaScript bit, I want us to create a JavaScript file. So let me type it here. This file, what do we do? So let me see. We've gone through arithmetics and then operators and all that. Okay, so let's take comment variables. Let's create variables and then console log all the variables. Let's create a variable. Okay, I'll think of the assignments, and then I'll share it later on in the group. But then for now, I think if there are no questions, we can end the class here, right? And then I'll share detailed of the assignment I want to put across in the group, if that's okay with everyone here, so that I can think of something more challenging for you guys. So are we all on the same page? Are we cool?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I think that will be it for today. Thank you guys. If there are no further questions, thank you guys for making time today. It's a Friday, and I know it wasn't easy because most of you probably have some things to do. So thank you for making time. We'll continue again on Monday. I think Monday we'll do a few of the introduction, and then we can start with the introduction to React proper. So thank you again, and then good night.